So today we're going to be talking about optimization, specifically how to optimize our decisions to get the most meaning out of our experiences. Last time we took my model's general idea about information and applied it to the first-person perspective. We ended up with these three concepts of honesty, value, and strength. So in today's video, we're going to talk about how by increasing each of these three components in a particular order, we can optimize the amount of meaning that we get out of our existence, or get out of any particular decision that we are trying to make. So that is to say, if we want to get the most meaningful experience that we can out of a decision, what do we actually do to have the highest chance of having that actually occur? So how do we optimize our decisions? In order to start optimizing, we have to have some kind of goal or objective to actually start optimizing towards. So the goal that we're going to have for optimization is that we want to make decisions that get us closer to experiences that provide us meaning. So meaning in this context is that which we desire. So if we want to increase the amount of meaning that we have, or the amount of things that we desire coming into our experiences, then we have to be able to make decisions that get us to those experiences more often. So using the three components that we described in the last video, this is the order that we use them to optimize best for getting the most meaning out of our decisions. We always ought to be completely honest, but we still need value. We always ought to be completely certain in the value that we have, but dishonest value is not actually valuable. And in order to perform the actions that are required by our value, we have to have some amount of strength. And we ought to be completely strong or capable of doing anything that we desire to do, but we must have some amount of honesty in order to actually know what is valuable to us. We're only going to get as far as we are honest with ourselves. So simply put, the priority is as follows to optimize our decisions towards our meaning. We want to first be honest to ourselves. Then we need to make sure that the value that we have is actually meaningful and desirable to us. So we need to have value to ourselves. And finally, we need to make sure that we have some amount of strength in order to do the things that is required by our value. Making sure that we are always honest to ourselves first, and then ensuring we are actually valuing the things that are truly meaningful to us, we will then be able to use our strength to more often get experiences out of reality that provide us that meaning. A way to think about this within the context of my model, at this particular point in our life, or to say that this is the moment where we are currently existing, so we're making decisions to get some kind of outcome within the future, our desire or our goal is to get as close as we can to this colorful line that is the life in which we make the best decisions to get us towards the meaning that we have within existence. And so that is to say, we are perfectly honest with ourselves, we are perfectly aware of what is meaningful to us, and we are perfectly capable and willing to make the decisions that get us to that meaning. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that the fourth dimensional object that we exist as is closing in or getting as close as we can to that possible existence. That existence is where we are experiencing the most meaning that we could within our existence. So honesty is the first priority. So this rule is we ought to be completely honest, yet we require value. If we do not have an accurate model of reality, we cannot make decisions that will with consistency provide us meaningful experiences. We ought to be completely honest. And so an example of not being completely honest would be in the bottom left here. So let's say we want to travel to a new country and we currently live in the United States. What if we believe that Alaska is actually part of Canada? And so we book a trip to Alaska, we fly all the way from the United States to Alaska, and then we get there and we realize, oh no, this isn't Canada, this is the United States. Because of a low amount of honesty, we are not actually experiencing the meaning that we had desired to experience. And so this is an example where we have a high amount of value, we know what is meaningful to us, and we are making decisions that get us towards that meaning. And we have a high amount of strength because we are capable of buying the ticket and we are following through with that and actually going to Alaska. But we have a low amount of honesty because when we get there, we realize that we didn't actually have the information to know that Alaska is not part of Canada. So although honesty is incredibly important and the first priority, we also have to have value. If we do not have a high amount of value, then we're not going to know what is actually meaningful to us. So in the bottom right example here, we have a classic example of someone who is very capable of doing some particular skill and follows through with that often, but has very little understanding of what is actually meaningful to them when it comes to creating things with that skill. So let's say they are an artist who can never actually paint something that they feel is worthy of painting or meaningful because they don't actually have a definition within themselves that tells them what is actually a meaningful painting or what is meaningful to paint. You have a high amount of honesty in that you know how to paint really well, and you have a high amount of strength in that you are constantly making paintings, but every time you make them, you have a low amount of value because you don't actually know or actually feel like it's actually meaningful to you because you're making decisions that don't actually result in experiences that are meaningful. And so from that, we then come to value as being the second priority. And value is a lot more complicated than honesty and strength because it is the principles and meaning that we actually have, and so there's a lot more to define here. So we ought to be completely certain in our value so that we make sure that we are actually making decisions that get us towards that value. Because if we're not certain in our value, then we're going to end up doing things that don't actually give us any meaning. So in the bottom left here, we can see another example of someone who has high honesty, low value, and high strength. This is an example of someone who is going through the routine day in and day out, but doesn't actually feel satisfied with their life. They come home, they watch a movie, go to bed, they wake up, they go to work, they go home, they go to bed, they wake up, they go to work, yada, yada, yada. But they don't actually feel like it's useful or meaningful towards their life. This is because either they are not making decisions that get them to the things that are meaningful, or because they don't even know what is meaningful for them. But a caveat to value is that if we do not have enough honesty, then we cannot know what is actually meaningful to us. So that is to say, dishonest value is not actually valuable to us. So in the bottom right here, we have an example of someone who has a low amount of honesty and arguably a low amount of value, but we could also argue a high amount of value and then a high amount of strength. So this is someone who in their old age reflects and realizes that although they made a lot of money and they were very prosperous in their endeavors, they actually didn't feel very fulfilled, and they realized that if they had gone down the path of having a family and having children while having less money, they would have been more fulfilled, or they would have had more meaning in their life. And so we can argue that it has a high amount of value because they did make decisions that got them towards things that they believed would give them value, but because they have a low amount of honesty, they ended up with an experience that wasn't actually as meaningful as they thought it would be. So another example of having low honesty and high value and high strength would be the bottom left here. So in this case, we have a high amount of value for money. We know that money is very meaningful to us genuinely, and it does make us feel very good, and we want experiences of having money. And we have a lot of strength in that we go out and we perform this action over and over and over, but it turns out that that action is gambling. And so we have a low amount of honesty because we are expecting, or we are in a way feeling like we're going to be making or getting a lot of experiences of having money, but it turns out that gambling is actually going to give us less money in the long term. And as a result of that, we would mark this behavior as a low honesty, high value, high strength behavior because we are not being honest with ourselves about the outcomes that are going to most likely occur based upon the data that we have about reality. So that is to say, if we place our value into experiences that have a very low amount of action, they aren't instantiated within reality very much, we're going to have a very hard time actually getting to those experiences. So having a value system that has a high amount of action is going to make it much easier for us to actually get to that meaning. And then finally, even if we have a high amount of value, so we know what's meaningful to us, and even if we have a high amount of information that will get us to that position, if we are not willing or capable to follow through with the actions that will get us to that meaning, then we're never actually going to experience it. So in the bottom right here is a good example of that. So let's say we know that high intensity experiences make us feel very meaningful, and we want to get as many of them as we can. We also know that skydiving is a very exciting experience that will give us that meaning that we desire. And we also know how to go to the skydiving place and how to get the money to actually go skydiving. But then once we get there in the air, we realize, oh no, we don't actually have the willingness to jump out of the plane, and so we're going to miss that experience of meaning. We can't follow through with a decision that is required by our value. The last priority is strength. So we ought to be completely capable and willing to do the things that are required by our value. So in the bottom left here, we have an example of someone who has a high amount of honesty and a high amount of value, so they know what's important to them and they know how to get that, but they have a low amount of strength in that they are incapable of doing the thing that is meaningful to them. They have a high amount of meaning when they ride bikes, but they can't ride a bike right now because they broke both their feet. They have a low amount of strength to be able to get that meaningful experience. But even if we are fully capable and willing to do the things that our value requires of us, if we are not honest with ourselves about what is actually meaningful or what is actually going to occur within reality, then our strength will be wasted on a bunch of actions that don't actually provide us meaningful experiences. So if we look in the bottom right here, there's an example of one of these cases. We have a low amount of information about the seeds that we're planting in a field, and we expect these seeds to provide us a grape plant. And so we have a high amount of value in that we know that grapes are meaningful to us, and we know that gardening and growing grapes is meaningful to us, and so we want to do that, and so we pick the information that allows us to grow grapes based upon our information about the seeds that we have, and then we follow through with that with our strength in that we are capable and willing to plant those seeds in the ground and do the work to do that. But then it turns out after 5 years of waiting, we end up with an apple tree. Even though we had a high amount of value and a high amount of strength, we ended up not getting the meaningful experience that we had desired originally because we had a low amount of honesty. And so that is to say, our strength only got us as far as we were honest with ourselves. So the reason that the first priority is honesty is because the value that we have about reality is created based upon our honesty. How often we actually get to meaningful experiences is dependent on how reliable our information is about reality. I can't get to experiences that are meaningful if I don't actually know how to get to those experiences. Or I think I do, but they don't actually ever occur because the information that I have is unreliable or doesn't actually predict reality. And so once we have enough honesty to construct a value system that is meaningful and also produces predictable experiences of meaning, we then have to start asking ourselves ourselves, what is the value that we have and why are we valuing things? If I am in an experience where I am very, very certain that some outcome is going to happen and it does happen, and I'm willing to follow through with the actions that require it to happen, but I end up actually not having a meaningful experience because of it, then it seems that I am valuing the incorrect decisions. I have the wrong idea of what my meaning actually is, and so I need to correct that in order to actually direct myself towards truly meaningful experiences. Finally, once we have the information and the value to start making decisions, we have to be strong enough or capable and willing enough to actually follow through with the actions required by our value in order to actually get experiences that are meaningful. If we do not follow through with the actions that we feel will get us towards meaningful experiences, we aren't going to be making decisions that to our best ability actually get us towards those meaningful experiences. This priority system doesn't guarantee a meaningful existence. It is entirely possible that you perform this priority system as perfectly as you can, and yet you still have experiences that are not meaningful. Because we are subjective agents existing through the content of existence, we are limited and unable to perfectly predict or know what is going to actually happen in reality. Or that is to say, there is some possibility of something happening. So we have no certainty about any particular thing actually happening. And then we also have to say there is some effectiveness of the value that we actually have. It may be that we continue to pick or look for or try to find the meaning that we actually have or that we feel, but the effectiveness of our value is actually very, very low. And so we're not actually able to ever find meaningful experiences because we've just ended up in a subjective agent that doesn't have meaningful experiences, right? That's totally possible. Finally, the meaningful experiences may just never be instantiated within reality. So there may actually never be a meaningful experience for you to have. You never actually find a configuration of your brain that provides you a meaningful experience, very similar to the effectiveness being super low. So there's some possibility of us actually getting to meaningful experiences, and then there's some amount of meaning that those experiences actually have for us. And then whether or not those meaningful experiences actually happen often or not is going to play into the fact of whether we actually have a very meaningful life, or rather to say we actually have very often and very high amounts of meaning within our existence. Using the terms within this model and operating across them, there isn't a better way or a more optimal way to arrange these particular behaviors so that we get towards a more meaningful existence. And so that is why the priority system is set up as it is. So we have to start with our honesty, and then we can start analyzing our value, and then we can start asking ourselves if we're capable and willing to do the things that our value requires of us. So in the next video, we're going to be moving outside of the first-person subjective experience and talking about multiple agents interacting with one another and how we can start optimizing social interactions or social systems. So when we're talking about multiple agents interacting, we can think of any situation with two or more agents as an emergent system that we can apply these three values onto as a way of optimizing those particular emergent systems in the same way that we've just optimized our first-person decision making.